Pain is not an enemy. It is the silent teacher that life sends when we are lost in illusion. We spend our days chasing comfort, avoiding discomfort and pretending everything is fine. Yet it is in pain, raw, unfiltered, undeniable, that the veil of illusion lifts. Pain strips away pretenses, revealing the truth we often ignore. Those moments when life hurts the most are not punishments, they are invitations to awaken, to see reality without the filters of desire, fear or ego. Every moment of pain carries a lesson that cannot be ignored. It exposes the places where we cling to illusions and resist the flow of reality. In the midst of suffering, the pretenses we wear, the identities we cling to, and the comforts we take for granted are stripped away, leaving nothing but raw awareness. It is through this exposure that clarity emerges, allowing us to see the subtle patterns of our mind and heart that had been hidden beneath layers of distraction and denial. Pain forces us to confront ourselves honestly, revealing the parts of our being that have been avoiding the truth. Suffering sharpens perception and awakens self-reflection. When life becomes uncomfortable, it pushes us inward, demanding attention to the choices we make, the attachments we hold, and the fears we nurture. In these moments, the mind cannot hide behind routine or habit. The silence that follows suffering becomes a mirror, reflecting not only our weaknesses but also our capacity for resilience. Awareness of our own vulnerability teaches us to observe life with greater honesty and depth. Pain opens the heart to empathy and compassion. Experiencing suffering personally allows us to recognize the struggles of others with authenticity. We begin to understand that no one moves through life untouched by hardship, and this recognition softens judgment while strengthening connection. The wounds we carry become bridges, linking us to the humanity around us and revealing that truth is not only personal but collective. In the shared experience of pain, the walls of isolation crumble, leaving space for understanding and care. It also teaches the impermanence of all experiences, whether pleasurable or painful. Pain reminds us that control is often an illusion and that life unfolds with its own rhythm, indifferent to our desires or expectations. Accepting this impermanence allows the mind to let go of resistance, embracing each moment as it comes. In surrendering to the transience of suffering, we uncover freedom, realizing that clinging to permanence is what often causes unnecessary agony. Through pain, the layers of illusion dissolve, leaving the essence of truth exposed. It forces confrontation with reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Every hardship carries within it a seed of awakening, a chance to perceive life without distortion. When pain is met with awareness rather than avoidance, it becomes a guide leading the mind and heart beyond superficiality toward profound understanding. In this way, suffering is not the enemy but the doorway, bringing us ever closer to the truth of existence. When life challenges you, it exposes the layers of false identities you have built around yourself. The roles you play, the masks you wear, and the ego-driven personas you cling to begin to crumble under pressure. These are not your true self, they are constructions meant to protect you, to make you acceptable to the world or to shield you from pain. Pain does not attack who you truly are, it attacks the illusions you have allowed to define you, forcing you to confront what lies beneath the surface. As these layers fall away, the superficial definitions of success, approval and validation lose their grip. The things you once believed made you important or secure no longer hold meaning when life presses hard. The voice of your ego that constantly demands recognition quiets, revealing a clarity that can only emerge when distraction is stripped away. In this stripping process, the raw essence of your being begins to show itself in stark honesty, uncolored by societal expectations or personal pretenses. The confrontation with your authentic self is rarely comfortable. The safety of familiar identities gives way to uncertainty, and the mind resists the exposure of its vulnerabilities. Yet in this discomfort lies the opportunity for profound understanding. You begin to see patterns of thought, habit, and attachment that were previously hidden. Pain becomes a mirror reflecting not only your fragility, but also your resilience, showing the parts of you that are genuine, unshakable, and capable of facing reality without fear. As the false layers dissolve, you discover a new form of freedom. You are no longer bound by the need to perform or prove yourself to others. The weight of pretense lifts, allowing you to move through life with a clarity and presence that was previously impossible. This freedom is not obtained by avoiding struggle or softening the blows of life, it is earned through endurance, observation, and acceptance of what is. In shedding these masks, you gain the strength to meet life directly and fully. The raw essence that remains is both simple and profound. It is a self unbound by comparison, ego, or expectation, capable of engaging with the world in honesty and integrity. Pain does not destroy this essence, it reveals it, guiding you toward a truer understanding of who you are. By facing the discomfort that strips away false identities, you emerge not diminished but more whole, more present, and more aligned with the reality of your own being. Pain is a force that strips away everything we pretend to be and exposes what we truly are beneath the surface. It attacks the illusions we hold on to tightly, the identities we construct to feel safe or important, and the masks we wear to hide vulnerability. In its raw intensity, it leaves nothing to hide behind. Every layer of pretense falls away, revealing the core of our being that we often ignore. It is through this exposure that the mind begins to see clearly, no longer clouded by fear, desire, or ego. As these illusions dissolve, life's trivialities lose their grip. The need for approval, the pursuit of validation, and the obsession with appearances all fade in the face of raw reality. Pain teaches that what we thought was crucial is often meaningless when measured against truth. The mind becomes silent enough to observe itself, to recognize patterns of attachment and thought that dictated behavior without awareness. Clarity emerges not through comfort, but through the confrontation with what is unchangeable and undeniable. Suffering forces introspection in ways ease and pleasure never can. When confronted with discomfort, the mind has no place to hide. It begins to question, reflect, and search for understanding. The wounds we carry illuminate our fears, insecurities, and unresolved conflicts. In this reflection, there is both revelation and growth. Pain becomes a teacher that demands attention, refusing to allow the distractions and illusions of daily life to cloud judgment or perception. Through endurance and observation, pain transforms the heart. It opens space for empathy, compassion, and connection, showing that suffering is not an individual burden but a universal experience. It softens rigidness and arrogance, revealing the shared nature of human struggle. In recognizing the vulnerability of oneself and others, the heart learns to move with gentleness and awareness, cultivating wisdom that comfort alone cannot instill. What remains after the layers have been stripped is a raw, unshakable presence. The self revealed by pain is not weak, it is whole, aware, and deeply aligned with reality. It engages with life directly, unbound by fear, attachment, or illusion. Pain does not diminish this essence but strengthens it, carving clarity out of confusion and honesty out of pretense. In this way, suffering is not an enemy, but a force that draws one ever closer to truth. Moments of suffering push the mind inward, demanding that you confront yourself in ways that comfort never can. When the heart aches or the body falters, there is no distraction powerful enough to hide the truth of your existence. Pain strips away illusions and forces a confrontation with your thoughts, emotions and actions. In that confrontation, the mind can no longer remain passive or distracted, and you are compelled to observe your own patterns, desires and fears with brutal honesty. As you face these inner realities, the clarity of self-reflection emerges. You begin to recognize the decisions, habits and attachments that have led to unnecessary suffering. Each memory of regret, each pang of guilt, and each sense of loss becomes a mirror, revealing the subtle ways in which you have avoided truth. The discomfort of introspection may feel unbearable at first, but it serves as a powerful tool for understanding the deeper currents of your life that usually remain unnoticed. Suffering also uncovers the hidden motivations behind your actions. The mind is forced to examine why it reacts with anger, fear, or frustration in certain situations. In doing so, you start to perceive the underlying patterns that govern behavior, the impulses that push you toward repetition, and the illusions that keep you trapped in cycles of pain. Through this understanding, self-awareness becomes sharper and the capacity to choose differently rather than react automatically begins to grow. Introspection born from pain strengthens the ability to act with conscious intention. The choices you make are no longer driven solely by habit or desire, but are guided by an awareness of consequences, values and inner truth. You begin to see how certain actions may lead to suffering and which attitudes cultivate peace and resilience. This reflective process transforms pain from a destructive force into a teacher, shaping the mind and heart toward wisdom and maturity. Ultimately, self-reflection in suffering fosters alignment between thought, emotion and action. The awareness gained allows the heart to move with integrity and the mind to act with clarity. Pain becomes a catalyst that forces honesty with oneself, removing the distractions of denial and pretense. Through this inward journey, the individual emerges more grounded, more conscious and more capable of engaging with life authentically and deliberately. Experiencing pain awakens a deep understanding of the struggles that others endure. When you face suffering yourself, it becomes impossible to ignore the reality that hardship is universal. The loneliness, fear and frustration that once seemed uniquely yours are suddenly recognized in the faces, words and actions of others. This recognition breaks down barriers and dissolves judgment, allowing the heart to move naturally toward empathy. Pain teaches that no one is exempt from life's challenges, and in this awareness, connection replaces isolation. As empathy grows, the mind begins to perceive the subtle suffering that often goes unnoticed. Small gestures, unspoken words, and hidden struggles become visible to those who have felt pain. The awareness of shared vulnerability creates a sense of solidarity and compassion that is born not from obligation, but from genuine understanding. This sensitivity reshapes the way you interact with the world, fostering patience, kindness, and a readiness to support others without expectation. Suffering also softens the rigidity of judgment and criticism. When you have experienced hurt, it is harder to dismiss or belittle the experiences of others. The sharpness of ego is tempered by the awareness that life can challenge anyone at any moment. In this state, the heart moves with greater openness and generosity, and actions are guided less by self-interest and more by a conscious acknowledgement of interconnectedness. Compassion becomes a natural response rather than a calculated choice. The empathy born from suffering is not limited to close relationships. It extends to strangers, communities, and even the environment. Pain teaches that life is fragile and interconnected, and that harm to one is felt directly or indirectly by all. This awareness nurtures a mindset that values understanding over judgment, giving over taking, and presence over indifference. The experience of hardship becomes a bridge, connecting hearts and creating a foundation for collective care and concern. Through repeated encounters with suffering, compassion becomes an intrinsic part of character. It is no longer something to be learned or forced, it is a natural state of being. Pain shapes the heart to perceive beyond surface appearances, to respond with kindness even when the world is harsh, and to act from a place of deep understanding. In this way, suffering transforms isolation into connection and turns the raw edges of life into pathways for empathy and love. Life constantly reminds us that control is largely an illusion. No matter how carefully we plan, how much we prepare, or how tightly we hold on, circumstances shift beyond our grasp. The world moves with a rhythm that cannot be dictated by human will, and the more we resist this flow, the deeper our frustration grows. Pain exposes this truth with undeniable force, showing that attempts to dominate outcomes often only tighten the chains that bind us. When control is challenged, the mind initially reacts with fear and resistance. We cling to routines, expectations and habits as if they could shield us from uncertainty. Every loss, failure or unexpected twist forces the mind to confront its limitations. It becomes clear that the comfort we associate with control is fleeting and fragile, and that our insistence on holding on to it only amplifies suffering. Pain acts as a mirror, reflecting the futility of attempting to command the uncontrollable. As this realization deepens, a shift begins to occur in awareness. Accepting the impermanence of control does not lead to passivity, rather it opens the door to freedom. The mind learns to flow with circumstances instead of resisting them, finding strength in adaptability rather than rigidity. By acknowledging that some forces cannot be controlled, the heart begins to release tension, the mind relinquishes unnecessary struggle, and life unfolds with a newfound clarity. The illusion of control also teaches humility. Recognizing the limits of our power fosters a deeper understanding of our place in the larger pattern of existence. The hardships that once provoked anger or despair now become teachers of patience, equanimity and discernment. Pain strips away arrogance and pride, replacing them with a grounded awareness that true mastery lies not in domination, but in alignment with reality. Through repeated encounters with uncontrollable circumstances, the heart and mind cultivate resilience. The surrender to what cannot be held or forced allows energy to be focused on what is meaningful and achievable. Pain, rather than being an enemy, becomes a guide that dissolves illusions, loosens the grip of fear, and leads to a freedom that comes from embracing life as it is. In this surrender, strength emerges, clarity rises, and then the mind moves with wisdom instead of resistance. Pain reveals the fleeting nature of all experiences, showing that nothing remains fixed or permanent. Joy, sorrow, gain and loss all arise and pass away in their own time, indifferent to our attachment or resistance. When suffering strikes, it forces the mind to confront this reality directly, making it impossible to ignore the transient nature of existence. The moments that feel overwhelming are never eternal, and the moments of pleasure will also fade, teaching a balance that cannot be learned through comfort alone. By witnessing impermanence, the mind begins to release its obsessive clinging to outcomes, possessions and identities. We recognize that holding on too tightly only amplifies pain when change inevitably occurs. Every loss and every disappointment becomes a lesson in letting go, and each moment of happiness becomes more precious because it is understood as temporary. Pain accelerates this understanding, stripping away the illusion that we can possess or control anything indefinitely. The impermanent nature of life teaches resilience and adaptability. When the heart understands that nothing lasts forever, suffering loses its power to crush and joy loses its capacity to inflate ego. Both pleasure and pain are seen as waves that rise and fall, and the mind begins to navigate life with steadiness. This recognition fosters an inner calm that is not dependent on external circumstances, allowing clarity and composure even in the midst of turmoil. Impermanence also deepens appreciation for the present moment. When you know that every sensation, encounter and feeling is temporary, each one gains significance. Pain and difficulty, though unwelcome, become opportunities to engage fully with reality as it is. Understanding that the intensity of suffering is transient allows the heart to endure it without losing equilibrium, and the fleeting nature of joy encourages gratitude without attachment. Through repeated encounters with impermanence, the mind and heart cultivate detachment without indifference. Pain becomes a teacher that dissolves obsession with permanence, revealing the flow of life in its true form. The ability to witness change without clinging or aversion strengthens awareness, fosters balance, and allows the self to move through life with a grounded sense of presence. In this way, impermanence is not a source of despair, but a guide that leads to clarity, freedom and inner stability. Pain forces the mind to drop all distractions and face reality as it is, without the cushions of habit or illusion. When suffering arrives, there is no escape through denial, avoidance or pretense. Every thought, every feeling and every sensation becomes immediate and undeniable. The mind cannot drift into stories about the past or fantasies about the future because the intensity of the present moment demands full attention. This confrontation strips away all superficial layers and exposes the raw truth of existence. As attention sharpens, the ability to observe without judgment begins to grow. Pain creates a space where the mind can witness thoughts and emotions without immediately reacting to them. Anger, fear, sorrow, or confusion are seen clearly for what they are, transient phenomena arising in consciousness. In this clarity, the mind learns the difference between the reaction of habit and the observation of awareness. Every pang of suffering becomes a tool to refine perception and strengthen presence. The body also becomes fully alive in moments of pain. Sensations that would normally be ignored or pushed aside become vivid and undeniable. The breath, the heartbeat, the tension in muscles, and the energy moving through the body are felt fully, anchoring the mind in the present. Through this embodied awareness, suffering is transformed from a purely mental experience into a teacher that demands full engagement with reality. Pain becomes a portal through which the mind and body reconnect with immediacy and vitality. Mindfulness in suffering cultivates resilience. By observing pain directly without flinching or avoidance, the mind learns to hold steady even when circumstances are extreme. The more the present is faced with clarity, the less the mind is scattered by fear or regret. Each encounter with suffering strengthens the capacity to remain grounded, alert and conscious. Pain teaches that true strength is not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to remain fully present within it. Through repeated encounters with suffering, mindfulness becomes an enduring quality. The mind develops the ability to witness life as it unfolds, moment by moment, without attachment or resistance. Pain sharpens this capacity, dissolving illusions and distractions and revealing reality with unflinching honesty. The presence cultivated through suffering becomes a source of insight, stability and clarity, allowing the self to navigate life with awareness, balance and profound understanding. Pain pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible, forcing the mind and body to confront experiences that lie beyond comfort. When faced with difficulty, the usual patterns of habit and routine are no longer sufficient to navigate reality. The familiar paths of safety and predictability fail to provide answers, leaving only the raw necessity to act, adapt, and endure. It is in this confrontation with discomfort that the mind becomes sharper and the heart more resilient, revealing strengths that were hidden beneath complacency. Enduring pain breaks the hold of fear that keeps growth at bay. Fear thrives in the realm of the comfortable, where risks are avoided and challenges are ignored. Suffering dismantles this false security, exposing the mind to the unknown and the unpredictable. Each moment of discomfort becomes an opportunity to confront fear directly, to understand its origin and to act in spite of it. Through repeated exposure, what once seemed impossible becomes manageable, and what once caused hesitation becomes a catalyst for courage. Pain also disrupts attachment to habitual responses. The mind and body often operate on autopilot, relying on routines to navigate daily life. When suffering occurs, these habitual mechanisms are insufficient, demanding creativity, awareness, and presence. The disruption forces the individual to engage fully, to experiment with new ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. In this process, limitation gives way to possibility, and old patterns are replaced by a more adaptive, flexible, and conscious approach to life. The discomfort of growth strengthens resilience in ways comfort never can. Each trial, each struggle, and each moment of endurance reinforces the capacity to withstand challenges without being overwhelmed. Pain becomes a teacher that demonstrates the impermanence of difficulty and the potential for mastery through persistence. The self learns to meet adversity not with avoidance but with awareness, adaptability, and determination, transforming obstacles into stepping stones for deeper understanding. Through the repeated embrace of discomfort, transformation becomes inevitable. The mind and heart expand, moving beyond the narrow confines of habit, fear, and complacency. Pain becomes not a threat, but a vehicle for evolution, revealing new dimensions of strength, awareness, and capability. By enduring what is difficult, the individual discovers that growth is not a reward, but a natural consequence of facing life fully, unflinching, and with conscious intent. Pain does not merely disrupt life, it exposes the illusions that the mind clings to for security and comfort. Every expectation, every belief about permanence, every attachment to identity begins to show its fragility under the weight of suffering. The moments of hurt and struggle peel away the layers of pretense that shield the self from reality. What remains is a raw encounter with existence itself, unfiltered and undeniable. Through this exposure, the mind can no longer hide behind distraction or denial, and truth begins to emerge with stark clarity. In the midst of suffering, every false narrative about who we are or what life owes us is challenged. The mind cannot maintain illusions when confronted with undeniable hardship. Pain strips away pride, ego, and self-deception, leaving only the essential core of being. Each pang of discomfort highlights what is real and permanent versus what is constructed and temporary. Through repeated exposure to this raw reality, understanding deepens and the clarity of truth begins to take root. Pain is not an enemy to be avoided, nor a curse to be lamented. It is a companion that walks beside us, opening our eyes when we are blind to reality. Every wound, every heartbreak, every hardship carries within it a seed of truth. When we stop resisting, stop labeling pain as bad, and instead meet it with awareness, we discover clarity, depth, and understanding. In embracing pain, we do not weaken, we awaken. And in that awakening, the truth becomes undeniable, unshakable, and profoundly liberating.